All right, today we're talking about compression. What is compression? What's it for? This is a little bit of a tough topic because it's a little bit hard to explain exactly what compression does. But I've heard it explained a couple different ways that hopefully will be helpful and clear. So the easiest way to think about it is that when you play dynamically, like you play or you should experiment with it. You should play a combination of, you should play softly and you should play hard and everywhere in between. And what that is, it's called dynamic range. It's part of what adds some interest to your playing when you're playing softly and when you're playing loudly. And typically when you do that, the volume increases. So if you just play kind of quietly, that's all just varying like how much we're digging in and that kind of thing. So that's called dynamic range, is like your quiet playing and your loud playing. And what a compressor does is it makes that range smaller. It makes your quieter signals louder and your louder signals a little quieter, so that there's less variation between your quiet playing and your loud playing. And sometimes that's useful and sometimes it's not. There's not a rule that like you have to use a compressor or you have to use it a certain way. It's just something that is a tool and an option. And a lot of times, like in a live environment, like whoever's running your kind of sound at front of house will use a compressor because they want everything to not be jumping all over the place volume-wise. They want something a little more consistent. And for you as a guitar player, it's really more of a stylistic choice than anything else. There are some genres of music that use ultra compressed guitar parts. Think of like funk music or like country music or like slide playing. A lot of times like we'll want to add an extra sustain, like especially to a clean guitar signal, which doesn't sustain a super long time. A compressor can add sustain. It can make the note last longer before it dies away. And so all of those are just a couple examples of where you might want to use a compressor. Some people use a compressor all the time. They keep it on all the time, and it's just a way, and they use it subtly. And so it's kind of a way to just slightly even out everything that you play regardless. And those are a couple of uses. So I want to kind of show you some examples of kind of what it sounds like. I've got a really simple compressor here. It's a Barber tone press. I have this set up pretty close to unity, which means that my loud signal without the compressor and with the compressor should be pretty close to the same. So I'm gonna just play loud and then turn the compressor on and off, and you shouldn't hear much difference between the two. So that's the idea. It's set to kind of the same volume as my loudest playing without the compressor and with it. So you can't really, it's not adding a whole lot of difference to it. But listen to the difference when I play quietly. So I'm gonna turn it off and just play as quiet as I can. Hopefully you can hear that really obvious difference. And so that's part of what it does, is it can make a quiet part kind of stick out still, especially in a mix where that makes a difference. I mentioned sustain earlier. It can make a note last a lot longer. So here's an example of just playing a chord without the compressor on. And you can hear how it fades away now with the compressor on. I did crank up the sustain on the compressor so you can hear it introduces some noise. And that kind of brings me into something else to talk about. Compressors can add a fair amount of noise, which is usually okay. Especially in a mix, it's not something that's going to be super noticeable, but it's just a lot of times comes with the territory with a compressor. A couple quick tips on using compression. If you're somebody who uses it always on, use it on all the time, I would say two quick things. One, I would recommend a compressor that has a blend knob on it, which will let you blend in your clean signal, your uncompressed signal, alongside the compressed one. It's called parallel compression. And so getting something like the tone press that does that, I recommend that a lot if you use it always on or if you're new to compression, because you can get some pretty aggressive like sustain settings, but then also alongside that you have your dry signal, which has, you know, the nice clear what's called transients. It's like the sound of your pick attacking the strings. You get that, and alongside it you get the compressed, more sustained sound next to each other, which makes a compressor super useful, especially when you're trying to use it subtly. And so I recommend that for sure. And then if you are someone who uses it always on, I would experiment with turning the compressor off once in a while. I've noticed a lot of times that, especially once I get past like a medium gain overdrive and anything above that, so high gain overdrive, distortion, fuzz, any of that stuff, once I get to that point, the gain is doing all the sustain that I would, and the compression that I would want it to do, because that's what gain and overdrive does to a signal. It compresses it and it adds sustain. That's by nature part of its qualities, part of the characteristics of that. And so I would experiment with not doing it, because a lot of times a compressor can add a lot of unwanted noise. The higher gain there is, having a compressor in front of it and sometimes even behind it can add a lot of extra noise. So just experiment with turning it on and off, I would say. And then again, there's no rules for this kind of stuff. It's really just preference. There's no rule that you have to use a compressor or that it has to go before your drives or after your drives. You don't even have to have one on your board or make any use of it at all. A lot of times it's more of like a front of house tool than anything else. But hopefully that gives you a rough idea of kind of what it does and whether or not you might want one or want to experiment with one. So hope that's helpful. See you later.